no-show socks out of stretch knit fabric scraps. So if you're like me and you sew garments, oftentimes, you know, when you're cutting the curves of a neckline or sleeves or something, you have like these off bits of scraps left. And typically stretch knit fabrics, if you're buying good quality stuff, can cost a little bit. So save those scraps because this is the perfect little project to use them up in. I'm going to give everybody about a minute or so to chime in and tune in. Say hello to some friends. Hi, Nancy, tuning in from Miami. Hey, girl. And Miss Gloria's tuning in from Atlanta. We got Meredith from California. Deborah from Massachusetts. It's in the house. Hi, Miss Monique, tuning in from Maryland. Great. Hey, Linda from Kansas. I'm coming to y'all from my home sewing studio here, and we live in North Central Florida, just north of Gainesville, Florida. All right. Hey, Marilyn. Hey, Helen from Jersey, tuning in. All right. So these are the little bitty socks that we're going to be making. Some of you might be thinking, I don't need little socks for kids. This pattern, it's like magic. We've made them using the same pattern, and this pattern is a couple years old already. I have a full step-by-step tutorial on this that you can also find on the Crafty Gemini YouTube channel. And this is the template piece that you'll need. I do provide you with a free PDF pattern that you can download. All you got to do, the link, if you're watching us on YouTube here, is in the description box below. You just click on the link, it takes you to a page, and it tells you, you know, enter your email address, and then the PDF file is emailed to you. And the way that you'll get it is a one-sheet PDF that looks like this. And if you want, you can go ahead and set them up with this over-the-shoulder camera angle and pop me in the bubble, and we will get started. All right, awesome. Looks good. So the one-page PDF, and I'll start you from the beginning. If you're new to PDF patterns, you need to check the little scale boxes that are in here. So I included one for you that says 1 inch by 1 inch here. And then for those of you that use a metric system, 3 centimeters by 3 centimeters will measure this bigger box, okay? Notice it says check scale before cutting. So what you want to do is once you get the PDF emailed to you, if you don't get it within a couple minutes or so, it probably went to your spam or junk folder because that can happen sometimes. And then you'll want to find it, save it to your device, your computer, or whatever you're going to be printing from. And when you set it to print, check your printer settings to make sure that it's going to print at 100%. That is the way that I designed this to look. On an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, it should come out like this so that you know you have this size, right? Of course, once you make a few, you can start changing and playing around with those printer settings. If you want to make one for a smaller child, maybe print it out at 90%, 85%, and that way you make sure that everything stays the same and proportionally it's shrunk down or increased. If you're making a bigger one, you may need to use multiple sheets because we crammed this one into one regular size 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, okay? So check this. The way you check it is you print out the sheet and then you take your ruler and you put it on top of the box. I'm using inches here. And if the box measures exactly 1 inch by 1 inch, then you know that it printed out at 100% scale, and then you're good to go, right? You can print it out on regular printer paper like this, but if you're going to be making a bunch of them, what I like to do is to print it out on a thicker paper, cardstock, and that way it's a slightly sturdier template. Another option would be to glue this to like a manila folder and then cut around it so that you make your own stiffer template. That works really well also. All right. Hi, Tamara. She says, hi, I love your show from Maine. Awesome. I'm sure it's snowing up there probably. Okay, let's see. All right. So here is a template. Obviously, you cut around it on the lines. And this template, you're going to make, you know, you're going to cut it out twice to make 2 pairs of socks. And so let me show you a little bit about what the little socks look like. And you can make these for slippers. Obviously, you want to be careful if you do have slick floors. You may want to do one of the many DIY things that you can do to make this grip a little bit more. But if you have carpet and you just want to wear them as house slippers, that would work too. But we actually wear these with shoes. So if the seams inside don't bother you too much, you can use them like that. Okay, so one thing I want to talk about is the fabric. We're obviously using stretch knit fabrics, and I have another one here that I started. And so the size that the little no-show socks are going to accommodate is going to be directly related to how much stretch is in the fabric that you're using. So what does that mean? That means, and I just have 2 fabrics here. We're going to cut out some new ones out of this same little fairy print. Fabric, if you're not familiar with working with stretch fabrics, you know, sometimes they'll have the same amount of stretch in different directions. So like the crosswise grain is what runs perpendicular to the selvage, which is this. And you can see how stretchy this is, right? Look how much stretch that has. So that means that this is going to accommodate either a way longer foot or a super wide foot, depending on how I place the template on this fabric, okay? So crosswise grain, it stretches that much. And then in the opposite direction, which runs parallel to your selvage, this is your lengthwise grain. And if I grab it and stretch it this way, it has some stretch, a decent amount, but it's not quite as stretchy as this. So you need to be careful with the fabric that you're using, because if you have a fabric like this that stretches a ton in one direction and not much in the other, then you need to think, okay, if this is for someone with a larger foot or a smaller foot, do I want the stretchiest grain line going this way across the foot so it accommodates a wider foot like I did here? Or do we want the stretch going in this direction so it accommodates a longer foot? So it's a little bit of planning that you need to do ahead of time, but it's such a small scrap busting project that, I mean, at least for your first couple pairs, just cut into some scraps and make one, and then you can start to kind of hack it and change it up to make it your own to suit your needs, okay? So this one, the way that I cut it is I laid out the pattern template so that the degree of greatest stretch in the fabric was going this way. So it's not going to stretch super duper long in this length, right? So this is how much the little sock is going to stretch. And I would say this probably will fit a size woman, size 6 or 7 foot. But that's about it. I wouldn't be able to get my size 11 foot in here because I used the grain line that had the least amount of stretch in the length of the foot. Does that make sense? So just think about length and width and how much stretch you have. So play around with that, okay? And once you figure it out with one fabric, if you have yardage, just go ahead and cut out a bunch and obviously lay your template piece on it the same way. That way you'll know that you'll be creating the socks with similar characteristics across all the ones that you make, okay? Hi, Lori, she says, I love it when I can actually catch a live. Well, I'm glad that you caught this live and are tuning in. All right, let's see. Okay, I'm just gonna keep an eye on the chat in case y'all have any specific questions, but I was showing you the stretch in this fabric, which is what we're going to cut out next, but notice this fabric, how much more it stretches. So this one I cut with the degree of greatest stretch, the opposite. So this one has the stretchiest direction going in the length of the foot. Do you see that? And I know this looks like nothing to you, but just so you know, pretend. That's how it's going to come together. So this direction along the template piece is the length of the foot. And so for a longer foot, like mine, I'm going to easily be able to fit into this little sock, right? Whereas the direction of the grain line or of the fabric stretch that has lesser stretch than this is going now across the width of my foot, which it still has a good bit, but I can probably, and these were cut with the same template, to show you that the degree of fabric and how much stretch it has, as well as in what direction you place your template, is going to tell you whether or not, you know, what size foot is going to be able to fit in there. So although we use the same template for both of these, this one will not fit my foot, but this one absolutely will. All right, so hopefully that visual helps y'all, so you can start kind of pulling out some scrap stretch knit fabrics from your stash and just, you know, stretch them out a little bit. And if you want, you can mark them with a pin so you know, hey, this, especially if it's a scrap and you don't have any selvages left on it, you can just stretch it and then you can tell whichever direction stretches the most, that's the crosswise grain, okay? Crystal says, I have size 11 feet. Thanks for mentioning that not all of us have dainty little feet. Girl, dainty. My 10-year-old daughter wears a woman's size 9. My son wears a men's size 8.5 already, and he's 12. We all have big feet up in here. Okay, so Amanda says, can I make these taller by adding length to the template? I don't see why not. I haven't played with that enough to see. So as Amanda, as I go through and cut this out, keep an eye on where on the template affects the height. And I'll tell you, it's right here, okay? This is the height from basically the center of the ankle to the top, but this is folded under to create the hemmed under top edge there of the ankle. So you would be adding the length in this direction. And just keep in mind that because this is a symmetrical template, right? Meaning it's identical across the center axis here. If you add some to here, make sure that you do it to the other side just so everything matches up when you do get to the sewing steps. Okay, so hopefully that visual helped y'all. And now we are going to cut some out of here. So I'm going to do these the same way I did these. for another little gift. Okay, it's just for a smaller foot. My sister would like these. Okay, so I'm going to fold it up twice. If you are not a very accurate cutter with a rotary cutter or with scissors, you don't have to double up your fabric. You can also just cut through one layer at a time. You'll just need to cut two out of this, okay? Oh, Elise says, I love these slippers. She's making the palmetto bag as we speak. Obviously in my bag club. Post pictures in the group. I want to see it, Elise. And for those of you that are in the bag club, bag number 4, which is the Sunset Project bag, was posted today as scheduled. I can't believe we're already on bag 4 of 5, but this is the project bag that we are on right now in my 8th edition bag club. Unfortunately, it's closed. You can't really sign up for it, but after the new year, all the courses that we're tackling, that I'm teaching my students how to make in the bag club will be up for individual sale. So if you like any of those bags, be on the lookout. After January 1st, you'll be able to sign up for the class by itself. Okay. Gladys says this will fit my size 6.5. I think so. This one, if you have a fabric that has similar amount of stretch to mine. All right, so what did we just say? We want the stretch, the degree of greatest stretch, which is going this way, to run side to side on my template. So I have it doubled up. And it doesn't matter if it's wrong sides touching or right sides touching, because again, I said it's a symmetrical template. So let's walk through this so that when you're at home, you don't cut it in the wrong direction, okay? So we said this direction is the length of the foot. So if I pull here, I'm limited on the length, right? And then side to side, circumference or width of the foot is the degree of greatest stretch. So do I have the template positioned on here correctly? I think so. Okay, so I'm going to place it on here, grab some weights, and then for cutting, you know, there's always multiple options for cutting out your fabric pieces. You can mark around it, trace around it, and then go through and cut with scissors. But because I have it doubled up, that's not really going to work for me here. I need to be able to just keep this flat on my table and cut through both. And so for this, because it is a smaller template, I'm going to grab my 28 millimeter Olfa rotary cutter. This is the one I typically use, 45 millimeter, so you can see from standard to the smaller one. So because we have some curves and some sharp little points here and there, this makes it easier for me to get through. Plus, it's not quite as small as, what is it, the 18 millimeter one. This is a little bit bigger than that, and so I can more easily cut through 2 layers of a lightweight stretch knit like this. Okay. Mirta's asking, what fabric would you recommend? So I would recommend, I really like the cotton spandex fabrics, but you can use a polyester, a double brush poly. Be careful because some of those double brush polys will have like 200% stretch in some directions. And so you just want to be mindful of that you don't end up making a sock that is, you know, totally slipping off of somebody's foot because there's way too much stretch in both directions. But cotton spandex works really well. The rayon jersey can tend to be tricky to work with because it's so flimsy and so light. And because there's so many angles and places that we're going to be sewing, I would probably stay away from that. So if it's your first time trying it, stick to something like a cotton spandex. Now, I'm cutting around this. I've done this a billion times probably. And I'm really careful not to cut into the pattern beyond where that curve is, okay? If you can't do that, just go far, you know, like as far as you can, stop shy of that little turning point, and then you can always go in and just cut really cleanly with a pair of scissors. Just make sure that you don't cut further in. So see, like that, let me take some little snips or these sharp scissors. So without moving anything, just tug on it a little so you can see where all it's still connected. And get rid of that. And this is going to be the safest way so that you don't run the risk of cutting too far in with the rotary cutter. Another reason I like to use the cardstock is that it's nice and stiff and it's a little bit thicker than regular paper, so I can run my rotary cutter blade right down the side of it almost as like a ruler or a thicker template, so that helps. And we're cutting around all the sides. Remember, we have 2 layers here, so we can just cut out both socks at the same time. This is going to have little corners again here. That one I got good. You just want to stop right when you get to the corner, if not a little shy of it. Come on, there. And just watch your fingers. Okay. Ta-da! you can see you barely need any fabric at all. So a couple things. Remember, we talked about printing out the template to scale, okay, making sure your printer settings are set to 100%. Then make sure that you are checking to see how you're placing the template based on the degree of stretch of your fabric in both directions. Look how cute. At first, I know people are like, what even is this? But it comes together. Oh, Linda says this would be a good use for the Martelli mat. Absolutely. You can turn the rotating mat. I have a mess here because I have a lot of projects going on. But yes, the Martelli, the rotating mat would be perfect for that. All right, so next step is to turn under the hem edge here, what is for this area. Okay, we're gonna turn that under. And I say 5/8 of an inch. I mean, you can go a little more, a little less. It's just the key thing is gonna be to be consistent because they need to match up. And I'll show you on one of these. Let me find the one that I actually did it right on. Yes, this one. So we're turning under towards the wrong side, okay, this top edge, to then stitch it in place. So it's key, let me move this. Can you see there? Yeah. It's key to turn it under by the same amount on both sides because when these get sewn together here, you want it to match up. If it's not, you're gonna have one that is like a little bit higher than the other. And the fabric does stretch a little bit, so when you go to sew this part here, you can kind of make it fit if you're a little tiny bit off, but just try to turn under the top hem here by the same amount so it's a little bit, you know, consistent and just easier to match up. Let's see. Christina says, can you use four-way stretch fabric or fleece? Yeah, so this fabric is four-way stretch. It's just that in one of the directions, it stretches way more than the other. So absolutely. And then fleece, I haven't tried it. I don't see why it wouldn't work. The shape of it would work fine. It's just how bulky it will be in such a small space. And fleece typically tends to stretch less than these lighter weight fabrics. So I would probably enlarge that template maybe to like 105 or 110% when you print it out at your printer settings, and then try it. Run a prototype first and see. But that would be super comfy, huh? Okay. So now let me grab my iron and kickstart it. We're going to flip each piece pretty side face down. And just on this edge here, on both sides, we're going to fold it under towards the wrong side, about 5/8 of an inch. And I always say I'm pretty good at eyeballing, and then of course I get to sew on camera live, and then I'm not pretty good at eyeballing. But I'm glad that I did this one right so I can show you what the goal is. You should aim to have it match up right there, okay? So that it's not off. And then of course if you have a clapper, this is the perfect time to use a clapper. I know a lot of you are used to using it now that you see me using the clapper for mostly quilting cottons and patchwork and stuff, but I always use it to hem my stretch knits. I'm wearing a Westchester Dolman top here today, and I definitely used my clapper to turn under the hems before top stitching. So for something like this, look at that. Ooh, beautiful. And if you don't have a tailor's clapper, I do believe we have some in the online shop. So you can check that out. Just you can visit our shop at craftygemini.com/shop. And there's like a little magnifying glass on the top right. You can type in any keyword there for any product that you're looking for. Just type in clapper and you'll see it pop up right there. Look at that. Beautiful. You can go in, of course, and place a couple pins if you need to help keep that in place. Now the pins I'm using here are ballpoint pins. At least I think they are because, you know, when you have kids that sew, all your pin cushions end up having all your pins and they're no longer sorted by what they are. But I know that the shorter ones are my ballpoint ones. So that's there. Do the same thing to the other side, and then I'm going to do the same thing to the other two sides of the other fabric template piece. So what are y'all working on this week? I have a Fiber Friday episode coming up. This Friday is going to be the first Friday of December, and I have a big surprise. So we've been working on a lot of different things here for y'all. So those of you that crochet or you knit and you like that kind of stuff, definitely tune in this Friday at 7 p.m. We'll be back on here, both Crafty Gemini Facebook page and on my YouTube channel. And I'm realizing that I'm putting these pins in from the side that I'm pressing, and I'll end up changing them out when I get to the sewing machine because this I will want to sew from this side. You can do it from either side. I think in the tutorial I did it from this side to show it so it shows up better on camera. But Nancy says she got her clapper and she loves it. I'm telling you, it's a game changer. People are like, what is this? Looks like a chunk of wood. I have like 5 different sizes, different widths. Gotta have it. Whenever I sew, I'm literally like, where is my clapper? I can't do anything without it. All right, so let's do the next ones here. What did I turn it under? About 5/8. Yeah, if one of you give this a try and add more height to it, I would love to see it. Post pics for sure. Okay. Ooh, Patty says she's going to tune in on Friday. We're talking all the yarny stuff. Y'all, I have been knitting. I have been spinning some lovely little yarn that I can't wait to show you all on Fiber Friday. That's where we talk all about wool, the fluffy goodness. Candy says she's knitting a sweater. Ooh, Margie's making more zippered pouches. Awesome. Oh, and Gladys says she's making personalized mugs. Definitely gift giving time, or gift making time for those of us last minute peoples. Okay. So I'm just going to put a pin in each just to hold that there steady. All right, so now we're going to go to the sewing machine, and I'm going to put a zigzag stitch. Now, if you don't have a machine that can do zigzag, you can do straight stitch, but I would probably lengthen it a good bit and maybe even tug on the fabric a little bit as you're sewing, because you want to have some built-in give there, especially for this. This is the part that, you know, it's going to get some wear and tear, like yanking on it, stretching it to put the foot inside the sock. So you definitely want to have something that can withstand that. And I'm taking out here, setting up my handy dandy Juki LB5020, which I think we only have like 1 or 2 left in stock. And with all the supply chain issues, y'all know, if you've been looking for one or asking someone for a gift, snag it. This is the perfect little workhorse machine at a budget-friendly price, okay? So I am going to select, and I hope, yeah, you can see my selections there. I'm going to put that there. But on my machine, the zigzag is number 7, or stitch number 7, and then it pulls up stitch width and stitch length. The stitch width is set to 5 millimeters. That's kind of wide. So I'm going to adjust that down to 4, even 3.5 would be okay. But the stitch length, 1.5 is 1.5 millimeters. That's super, super short. A lot of you will find, you know, when you follow a pattern or a tutorial that says zigzag stitch, you set it and your machine may default to different stitch length and stitch width settings. And then what happens is when it's such a short stitch length like this, that's the distance this way that the machine is sewing the zigzag. So not the zig and the zag. The side to side measurement is that 4 millimeters. So 4 millimeters zig and zagging left to right. But the space between each zig and zag is the stitch length. And so when it's too little, sometimes, especially working with stretchy fabrics, the machine is just going to go da, 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 and it's just going to keep stitching in place. Then you end up with a huge knot of thread. Then you got to get your screwdriver. You got to take out these 2 screws. Has that happened to anybody? Then you got to pop this off and get the big old wad of thread that's underneath the metal throat plate out of there before you can even think about sewing with it, right? That's what happens. The stitch length is too short. You need to lengthen it to give the machine room to move, okay? As it takes those stitches. So I'm gonna flip this over. And the fabric that I'm working with here is pretty lightweight. Like I can feel from the top where the edge is so that I make sure that I'm catching it. Okay? Couple things. I have an 80-12 ballpoint needle in my machine, okay? I'm not using a stretch because this doesn't really have like, it's not like a dance wear or swimwear. That's usually when I use my stretch needles. But the ballpoint needle here, instead of piercing through the fabric, it's just going to kind of nestle itself in between the fibers. And so I find that that works well for most home sewing machines. On my semi-industrial, I can just throw a universal in there and go. But on this one, I have an 80-12 ballpoint jersey needle. And I have polyester thread in here. And then what else do I need to tell you? Oh, I almost forgot because this machine is amazing. All my Jukis are. So I don't have a walking foot for this machine yet. And I keep saying that. I really need to buy one. But I don't need to change out my presser foot. Your machine may be different. And I've had all kinds of makes and models of machines in the past that I have had to put on a walking foot because it will not sew through stretch knits. So before I jinx my little machine here, I'll show you what I mean. I have just the basic universal foot and I'm going to start stitching. Ta-da! It doesn't eat the fabric. I can just keep going. I went ahead and set it so that when it stops, the needle is down. And I'm just stitching closer to the edge of where that hem is turned under so I can catch it on the underside. Just kind of like a little just decorative hem top stitching thing here, just so we don't have the raw edge completely exposed. All right, so I'm stitching there, and then I'm gonna take one stitch to the outside because now I need to pivot and come off the edge here. It's the top of where we had folded it previously. And I'll just leave it like that. So yeah, you may need a walking foot for your machine, you may not. I always like to mention that though, because then people will email me and be like, I did what you did and it didn't work. But it's because you had a different sewing machine. All right. Maureen says, why are you stitching on the pretty side? I'm stitching on the pretty side so I can kind of find myself a guide here of where the stitching is going to be. It's just going to help make it a little bit more symmetrical when the two top points meet up, assuming that I folded them under by the same amount. You can sew from this side. I just typically, if I'm top stitching something, I typically stitch it from the front because that's the side I'm going to see. So I want that to be the most accurate. But if it's tricky for you to kind of see exactly where you're starting and stopping, just do it from the underside is fine. Because that way you'll know for sure that you can catch it because you're seeing the edge, right? So I'm going to stop to the outside. I leave my needle in the project, lift the presser foot, and then I'm going to stitch down this way. And sometimes, you know, you might miss a little bit of the hem. If you miss a little bit, but then the rest of the way you got back on, just leave it. There's no need to take it out. That little bit that you didn't catch is not going to fray, and it's probably, if it's just a little chunk, it's not going to be enough to get that hem to pop up on you, okay? So that's what we want. And do you see how this machine, I mean, this is like a $300 and some machine. It doesn't ruffle up my fabric. It's not stretching it. It's not shrinking it together. I mean, I'm just saying. I'm just saying. Okay. Oh, awesome. Kim says, I got 2 Jukis a few weeks ago from our shop. She says, one for her and one for a Christmas gift. Oh, y'all are going to be sewing up a storm. You're going to love, love, love these machines. So I'm doing the other one now. All right, let's keep this down. And I can see I was a little uneven turning under this hem. But as long as you make sure that you catch the hem, you know, the rest of the way down, you're okay. The only thing is, right, the machine is a little workhorse, but it doesn't have the fancy bells and whistles of my other machine. Like automatic thread cutter, you're not going to get it in a $300 machine. But it's okay. I can grab a little snips and take my time when I am, you know, using this. Because look, no walking foot, there's no headaches. Stop with the needle to the outside so I can pivot. All right. And we'll stitch off here. Now, remember that my settings on this machine were 4mm stitch width for my zigzag and 3mm stitch length. Play around with that a little bit. If your machine gets hung up, lengthen it or widen it a little bit, okay? That also took me a little trial and error because every machine is different, you know? If I do it on another machine, it may not require those the numbers to be that high, you know, like that long or that wide. Okay, so we're just going to press this real quick. Woo! I'm just saying, when you press perfect stitches like that, look at that. And you can barely see it because I'm using a neutral thread, but that's fine. Super cute. Let's see if I caught everything underneath. Oh, yes. I got close right there, but I caught them. Cute finish. Lisette is asking, what's the number of the Juki? It's the LB5020, LB5020. All right. Great little workhorse machine, you know, for people that are maybe looking to upgrade from a basic machine. And the thing that I like to do is play around with a lot of different machines because I sew a lot of different things. So you may have a machine that someone who only sews lightweight garments really loves, but if you want to sew quilted handbags and you want to use foam stabilizer, it may not work for you, right? So I have sewn everything on this, from lightweight, stretch knits, quilting cottons, foam. What did I make? Like the first 3 handbags of the bag club, I filmed the video lessons on making it on this little machine. Okay. All right. Jay's asking, is the machine a 5mm or 9mm? And I'm assuming you are asking about the width or the stitch length, both, and I'll show you. So 0, 0 on this machine is the center needle position, so just basic straight stitch. And then if I go to stitch length, it goes up to 5mm in stitch length. And then the needle position goes all the way up to 7, okay? So if we do a zigzag stitch, which is 7, I'll show you what the width goes up to. the same 7 millimeters on a width of a zigzag stitch, and then the stitch length is going to go up to 5 again. All right, so it's a 7 millimeter instead of a 5 or a 9. Okay, so all right, we have these two. Next up, we are going to, where am I? Let's see, flip this pretty side face up, and you're going to fold it in half, starting to come together. So this is where I mean that if you turned under the hem by the same consistent amount, they should match up nicely here. Okay, and if they're off by a little bit when it's folded, not a big deal, because you still have to accommodate for that 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, so you can kind of fudge it a little because you can see the fabric stretches. All right, here we're going to grab a couple pins. And I'm placing a pin, so you see where we're going to sew next is going to be these 2 straight seams. There's one here, just from here to here, and we do need to backstitch at the beginning and at the end, so be careful if your machine loves to eat stretch knits that you start a little bit further in from the edge. This is another tip. If you start out here with your needle before you get to the fabric, you're going to be pushing down a lightweight, stretchy fabric into the needle hole on the throat plate of your machine. And that's what a lot of people struggle with. Even if you have a great machine, super expensive, fancy and all that, it'll start pushing, and then you get this jammed. Have that ever happened to you? Where you're like lifting the needle and the presser foot and you're like literally pulling the fabric out and it won't come out? That's what happens. It ate your fabric. That's what we call it. So start in, take one back stitch, and then keep going. And the same thing goes for the opposite end as well. Don't go all the way off the edge and then back stitch right there, because it's just loose fabric and it stretches. So it more easily gets fed down the throat, the opening there for the needle of your throat plate. So that's one seam. We're going to do a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and I'm going to stitch here and then this straight seam. These little peaks that you see here, don't touch them yet. That will be the next step after. So again, match this up here. Put your pin. I'll put another pin here and we'll stitch these up. And I'm here talking about eating fabric. We'll see if I remember to do that so that this machine doesn't eat my fabric. But the other pair I made them on here too. I mean, I've made even tissue knit garments on this machine, like super sheer knits, which the lighter it is, the trickier it can be to sew. All right, let's grab the machine back. Oh, Mary Grace, she says she pulled over into a park so she can watch. I hope the weather's nice there. At least. Okay. Oh, that's a good spot. So 1/4 inch seam, let me get all my stuff. So these, believe it or not, we're going to use a straight stitch here. Straight stitch. And you can use a lightning stitch if you have that slanted kind of lightning bolt stitch. You can use that too. But I find that because these seams are going straight up and down here at the back of the heel, this is not really getting stretched so much in this direction. And I use a straight stitch and you can see that it still is holding up really, really well. Okay? And the same thing is going to go for this one here. This seam is not really getting too much, especially if you've set it up so that the greatest degree of stretch of the fabric is going in this direction. It's going to hold up pretty good. So let's see if this Juki is not going to eat my fabric, especially when you start off on a triangular point like this. Even if it's a stable fabric like quilting cotton, you probably have been there. It eats your fabric. Most machines will. It's just about troubleshooting those little things. Let me set straight stitch, and then I'm going to move my needle position over to my 1/4 inch-ish. And then the stitch length, this is super important. Because we're sewing on stretchy fabrics and we're going to use a straight stitch, do not keep it to the regular straight stitch length you would typically use for a construction stitch. You know how I usually am like, oh, it's a construction seam. Leave it at 2 to 2.5. On stretchy fabrics, that's not going to work. Most of y'all at your machines, it's going to just take stitches in the same place over and over again. So you need to lengthen it here. I find that because the fabric stretches, it's like a stretch and it goes back, stretch and it goes back. So even though you think or you have it set to a longer stitch length, it still ends up looking really small. So go up, okay? And I'm going to set mine to like 3 millimeters. And it sounds super big, but you'll see what I mean. All right, so I'm going to take a stitch and then I'm going to back stitch. And then I keep going. And it didn't eat my fabric. I love my little Juki, I'm telling y'all. All right. And then when I get to the top here, I am going to back stitch. And back here, it's fine to backstitch, you know, when you get to the end, because we have the hem, that creates a little bit more bulk. So we have more fabric there that's stabilizing the seam. And so you're not likely to get the fabric to like eat, or excuse me, to get your machine to eat your fabric here at the top, because it has more layers, it's more stable. Okay. Oh, Rhonda says she got the pattern a long time ago, but she's going to try it this week. Yeah, so I should mention that. Let me grab this. So the pattern for this is a free PDF download that I provide for you. The link is in the chat box. It's also in the video description box if you're watching us on YouTube. Just print out the one-page PDF like this. Make sure that you print it out at 100% so it can be the same size as mine. And then just cut it out. And we cut out 2 of these, and this is how we're constructing it to make these little no-show socks. Okay? Then here, do the next one, match this up as best I can up top here. Now, if the seams bother you, because I know they do for a lot of people and kids especially, I have one fussy kid that any seam, any stretch, any elastic, anything just bothers her. So I backstitch at the beginning and at the end. If the seams bother you, you may consider using a lighter fabric or trimming the seams, and I'll show you when, to an even shorter seam allowance. That may help. I don't really have an issue with that, so I never really think about those things. Okay, so that was that. That seam straight and that seam straight. I'm going to do the same thing to the other sock. Let's see. Janet says, I think this will be a good pattern for doll clothes shoes. She says you just need to reduce it way down. Yeah, make it way, way down. Super teensy, I think. And then if it's a stretchy fabric, you'll easily be able to drape it over the doll's foot. And that way it'll hold, right? Because if it's stretching to stay on, you're going to have a better chance of it actually staying and not just slipping off. But look at that. I backstitched off the edge. I'm like, I backstitched off the edge and it didn't eat my fabric. Well, yeah, because I ran out of bobbin thread. Did I? I sure did, y'all. Let me wind this real quick. I was like, that went through so smoothly. I mean, it still does anyway, but it would help if I had thread in there. Okay. I'm just going to wind a little bit since we're almost done anyways, okay? Let's see if we have any other questions here. Linda's asking, if you're making these with fleece, you could use a serger, or could you use serger seams on the outside? That would be cool, actually. So you wouldn't have the bulk of the seam allowance on the inside. You're saying like a more decorative serger stitch on the outside. Ooh, sounds interesting. I'm intrigued. If you give it a try, Linda, let us know and post pictures on my page or in my Facebook groups, because I would definitely love to see that. That's a great idea, actually. You know how they do some decorative seams and stuff to the outside of projects? That would be cool, because then you would get basically the pretty side of the project against your feet. That would be cool and super comfortable. And this machine does have a little automatic needle threader. You saw that? And I'm not even that close to it. And I was able to use it with no issues. Let me bring this thread up. Okay. Let's get back to finishing this seam real quick. And so for picking up where I left off, I'm not going to pull out the stitches. I just pick up where it stopped, where I ran out of bobbin thread. A few stitches before I ran out, I will pick up there, needle down. So I overlap the last couple stitches by a few, and then I just keep going. And that's enough to keep it secured in place. You see, it still didn't eat my fabric. Yes. And look how flat it keeps the seam. You know when we sew with light stretch knit sometimes on a lot of machines, they just, you know, you got to kind of be finessing it, or it comes out looking a mess and then you have to make it look nice and flat with the iron. I don't have to do that here. So look at that. Perfect. All right, and the last one here. And then all we need to do is actually turn the corners for the toes and the heel. And it's kind of like, it's already been cut for you. It's like when we box corners on pouches and stuff and little bags. I'll show you when we get there. So again here, back stitch at the top. It is a quick make, y'all. If you cut out a bunch at once, then you can just sit there, watch TV, and sew them up assembly line style for sure. All right, so we have a couple little seams left to sew and a few more tips, and then we'll be all done. That was pretty quick. So here's what it's looking like. These are wrong side out. Let me make sure. I stitched the straight seam here, 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 and here. Great. So now we need to close up the toe and the heel, okay? So for this, it's like, have you ever done one of my zippered pouches or boxy pouches or totes where I tell you put your hand inside, run that seam down the middle of your hand like this? I feel like I've said this 73 times in tutorials before. And then we're gonna run the seam right down the middle so that we have the same amount of fabric folded to the right and to the left of that center seam. That's going to ensure that this seam is centered. Do you see that? And then we're going to sew the same way that you see in the template. Here's like a slight curve. That's what you're going to sew to close that up. A slight curve with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm going to put a pin through here. I put the pin in at a diagonal, kind of at an angle, so that it keeps that open seam right down the middle, okay? Sometimes if you pin off to the side or front and back somewhere here, that can still shift on you, so that's a tip for pinning. If you put it at an angle across whatever intersecting point you want, that will help keep that in place. And then we're gonna do the same thing for the heel. So same thing, I pinch it, make sure that seam is running down the center. I'm gonna open it. That just helps to reduce some bulk, and you don't really have to press it or nothing. It's such a teensy little spot. And then I'll put a pin through there too. How many of y'all are looking through your fabric scraps right now? Your stretch fabric scraps. Ah, I pinned myself. Okay. So this one you'll see that you might have a little bit of a difference there. It's no big deal. It's still way less than the seam allowance. So just make it so where it lies flat. And then you can pin through all the layers at an angle. Okay, I'm going to pin the other one too, and that way we can just sew it up at once. Oh, all these new messages came in. Let's see. Kim is asking, do you think it would be difficult to line these with fleece? To line them with fleece. So one thing to keep in mind about linings, especially using a thick fabric like fleece, is that the lining is going to make the interior space of the sock smaller, right? Because you're adding fabric to the inside, you're reducing the space inside, and you're using a thick fabric. So I think if you increased the printer settings, like whatever percentage you print it at, you may be able to do that. You just have to figure out where in the construction process you would add the fleece. You could also make it like a handbag, right? Sew one like this, sew one out of fleece, then put them together, pretty sides touching, leave a hole, and then flip it. That could work. So many ideas. I love chatting with y'all on here. But I think for something like that, you definitely need to use a nice stretchy fleece and definitely increase the template size because I think it'll make it too small on the inside. For an adult foot at least. It might work. Depends, on the fabrics and how stretchy the fleece and the exterior fabric is. Maybe if you use like a light fleece that is super stretchy for both exterior and lining, that could work. All right. Oh, Joanne says these are too cute. She's going to make some with funny fabrics for stocking stuffers. What a great idea. That sounds so fun. Okay, let's sew these up. And again, I've left it still my same settings. I'm a straight stitch and I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we're just going to take a slight curve, okay? Same thing. I'm going to back stitch. Look at this machine. I know you know. If you have tried to sew stretchy fabrics on your machine and it eats it, I know you know what a big deal this is, that I don't even have to change my presser foot on this machine, and I can back stitch off the edge and everything. Look at that. Love it. And we do have some more machines on order, but I think we only have a couple in stock. The last time we restocked, which was just recently, we put in an order in, I think it was August, and we didn't get them till November. So, all right, next one here. Again, a slight curve. Just make sure that the fabric is flat. That's the key thing. You don't want to really be stitching any puckers into your heel, okay? So I back stitched. Make sure that seam stays open for me. Oop, I might have gone a little big on that one. No worries, it stretches. Very, very forgiving project. So cute. Let's do the other one, and then we'll give it a little press, and I'll flip it out and show y'all what I got. Okay. Tony says, I never thought making socks would be so easy. Well, with this little pattern that I created for you, it is. This was a fun project we were making with kids when did we make this? 2018? I think it was 3 or 4 years ago we started making them for kids, because we were making clothes in the classes I was teaching my kids and some other homeschool kids at my old little sewing studio in town. And they were making shirts, like raglan t-shirts and like baseball style t-shirts and stuff. And they had all these scraps left over. And I'm like, this fabric is a little expensive. These aren't really scraps to throw away, guys. Let's make something else out of them. It was like really good quality cotton spandex. And I'm like, yeah, we're not throwing this stuff away. You know, kids, if you've ever taught kids to sew, I don't know what it is. It's like you give them a template and they immediately go to like opening up the full yardage and they want to put the template smack dab in the center of your fabric. It'll be like this. You give them a whole yard and they'll be like, boom. Like the most wasteful cut that has ever been made. And you're like, no, no, no. Oh, yes, I remember those days. Okay, so now let's grab our iron. Oh, Jackie B is asking, are Fiber Fridays recorded like the WIP Wednesdays? Absolutely. You can find, we just started Fiber Fridays, what, 2 months ago in October. So there's only a couple episodes up so far, but you can do a search on YouTube. Just type in Crafty Gemini Fiber Fridays and you'll see them there. We just started. It's like a new thing. We are growing the fiber side of the business. So think yarn, knitting needles, crochet hooks, stuff like that for sale, and knit alongs and patterns and fun classes and stuff like that. So we're working on that now that I've, hired some more employees and stuff to help me with these things. All right, so here it is. We're going to steam it. I'm just going to press it real quick. One thing I didn't mention, because like I said, this stuff never bothers me, but you can trim away the excess seam allowance. This one I did forget to trim because you get little dog ears here at the toe. So you can trim that up a little. And remember that the stretch knit fabrics we're working with, they don't fray. So it doesn't matter if you're cutting like a raw edge like that. If you have anything that's like a little bit off, remember we said this stuck out a little bit here, we can go in and trim. If you want to cut them smaller, you can, like just leave yourself 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. That works. If you have pinking shears, make sure that they're good ones, because pinking shears don't always cut through stretch knit fabrics. But look at these little slips. They're so cute. Let me trim these guys up. And I just give it a little press and that's it. Just make sure that on those last couple construction seams that you are back stitching at the beginning and at the end, especially if you plan to have them be machine washed, wear and tear, the fabric stretches, all these seams are going to be stretched. You don't want the stitches to start popping on whoever you end up giving this to. Look at that. Look at that. If you made these for babies, they would be so cute. So fun. But anyways, that is how you make my little no-show socks. If some of you experiment out there with the fleece fabric that you've been talking about on here, so you see how they're the same size. And because we oriented it, remember the template, make sure that you're noting which direction of greatest stretch you have on your specific fabric. You can make them for different people, even though you use the same template, okay? But you can see that all these are the same, because I laid the template down to cut in the same orientation. So these all stretch the same amount this way, you see? But they also stretch the same amount this way. So if I would have done one oriented one way and the other, they would fit 2 totally different size feet. So hopefully that helps. If you're just tuning in, make sure that you watch the recording so you can watch the beginning part where I kind of set you up with the foundation of like what you need to look at based on how much stretch the fabric has that you want to use for these, okay? So play around with that. Oh my gosh, super cute little gifts. I hope that you all enjoyed this. Let me see if there's any last minute questions. Ooh, Ruth says, I have 2 teenage granddaughters and they always steal my socks when they come over to stay. I definitely need to make socks. This is great. Natalie's asking, can you make the toes round? So they are slightly round. You would just have to adjust the template yourself if you wanted to give it like a more rounder shape. It looks kind of pointy like this, but remember, this stretches. And what you want is that the sock stretch to stay on the foot. If it doesn't have to stretch to stay on, it's going to slip off. There's no way around it, okay? So think about that. And then Chris is saying or asking, can you shrink the pattern to make baby socks with little stuffed toy or rattles on them? Absolutely. We mentioned this at the beginning. This was designed for you to print out at 100% scale. So it fits, you can see barely on one 8.5-inch by 11 sheet of paper. Okay, you can set this to print larger if you, especially if you have like legal size paper printer. You can take it to your local print shop and have, you know, print it out one like this, take it to a local print shop, and they can print this 110% if you want to go bigger, or they can print it at 75% if you want to go way smaller. So you just adjust this based on how it's printed, okay? But at 100% scale, this is what we get. And it's going to depend. You can use the same size, just if you have a stretchier fabric, it will obviously accommodate a bigger size foot, okay? All right. Well, you can put them on my face now. Let me see if there's any last minute questions here for me. Awesome. That looks like it's it. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in today for another episode of WIP Wednesday. If you are into fiber and stuff that has to do with yarn, tune in this Friday, because the first Friday of every month at 7 p.m. Eastern, I go live for a new series we recently started called Fiber Fridays. And you can see that on my YouTube page, I believe. But I'll go live both on YouTube and on the Crafty Gemini Facebook page. All right? So if you want the pattern to make the little no-show socks that we just went over how to make sure you use the link that we've included for you in the chat box and in the video description box. And that page, you just have to enter your name, I think, an email address, and then the system will automatically email you the PDF for you to download, print it out, and start making your own little socks. Okay? Thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week, and I will see those of you that come back on Friday. If not, I'll see you next Wednesday.